Allen Lund Company, 47 years young and a proud sponsor, wishes OOIDA all the best as you celebrate 50 years.
Direct to you from Interstate 70's Exit 24 in Grain Valley, Missouri. OOIDA, the only national organization representing professional truckers, presents Landline Now.
Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg joins the show to talk about the department's newly launched Truck Leasing Task Force. He tells us that the latest moves out of the U.S. DOT are aimed at improving the lives of truckers, which keeps them in the industry and makes our roadways safer. New truck parking spaces are going in across the country thanks to federal grants and private enterprise. Tyson Fisher of Landline Magazine breaks down the good, the bad, and the newest cases of NIMBYism in another installment of The Parking Zone. And finally, the spot market has been up and down this year. Robert Rouse of DAT provides some tips on what owner-operators can do to get a leg up. But first, the news with Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Ryan. We begin tonight with efforts within the U.S. DOT to clamp down on predatory lease purchase agreements. One day after the first meeting of the Truck Leasing Task Force, Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg told us this is about making sure people aren't being taken advantage of, which by extension keeps drivers in the industry, which by extension makes our roadways safer.
If you look at the number of drivers who leave their job every year, that alone is enough to cover the gap we have right now between the number of truck drivers who are operating and the number our country really needs. So, of course, we got to do recruiting. We got to encourage people and make it easier for people to take up this career. But that's just a leaky bucket if we're not making sure that this is a job that people want to stay in, both because that's how we're going to keep our numbers of drivers consistent with what America needs, and because, as you mentioned, we know that experienced drivers are the safest drivers, and so it's a safety win every time you keep a good, experienced driver on the road. But in order to get after that, that means we've got to tackle the issues that are affecting quality of life.
Much more of our conversation with Secretary Buttigieg a little later on in the program. The Secretary's concerns surrounding lease purchase agreements were backed up Tuesday by members of the Truck Leasing Task Force. Attorney Paul Cullen Jr., one of 9 members of the panel, said the entire system stacks the odds against drivers who get caught in the game.
The problem is largely that the carrier who offers lease purchase programs has so much power over the driver under both contracts. Under the leasing the truck back from the carrier, from the driver, they have an enormous amount of authority to influence the driver's behavior, and this is where safety comes into play. The carrier has such control over that driver and what happens because of the existence of both contracts. And it's really, I would say, we see many examples of carriers who, because they control the income of the driver, will see that the driver is coming closer to completing their lease on which they're purported to be able to take possession of ownership of the final ownership of the vehicle. And yet then somehow the loads start to dry up and the driver all of a sudden can't make his truck payments and therefore defaults on the lease part of the lease purchase part agreement. And then the driver takes the vehicle and the driver loses all equity that they thought they were building up in it. And then the carrier finds the next person to take advantage of there. And so I'd like to suggest that we consider the idea that perhaps motor carriers should not own the debt of a driver. The driver should not be, the carrier should not have that additional financial power to control the driver at all. If you find someone who successfully completed a lease purchase program and got a truck out of it, they are what they call these days a unicorn. And is this problem one that we can fix with disclosures and other rules, or should motor carriers not be able to own the debt over a driver and wield that type of power.
Jim Jefferson of OOIDA, another member of the panel, agreed.
I agree with Paul. When you get an entity that controls both the lease purchase side and the carrier side, they've got total control over that guy that's supposed to be an independent contractor. And basically, he ends up being a glorified employee. They treat him like an employee, but they give him all the responsibilities of an independent contractor. And in a lot of cases, they make less money than what a company driver would make. So, I mean, I think Paul's got a good point in maybe there should be some separation between a lease purchase company and a carrier so that person doesn't control every aspect of the deal with the driver.
The Truck Leasing Task Force was formed to evaluate the effects of commercial motor vehicle lease arrangements, discuss best practices for future agreements, and make recommendations to FMCSA. Much more on this issue in a little bit in our conversation with Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg. The Energy Information Administration expects increased crude oil prices and the diesel average to stay below $4 a gallon in 2023. The forecast comes via the agency's most recent short-term energy outlook. EIA expects the Brent crude oil spot price to average $78 per barrel in July. By fourth quarter 2023, EIA expects that price to reach $80 per barrel before averaging $84 per barrel in 2024. The increase is attributed to an expected decline in global oil inventories over the next 5 quarters. As for diesel prices, the EIA forecast has the national average for on-highway diesel prices at $3.88 a gallon by the end of this year, before increasing to $3.92 by the fourth quarter of next year. Too Simple has been granted a reprieve as it fends off a delisting threat from the NASDAQ. The autonomous trucking software company had fallen out of compliance with the exchange after failing to file financial reports on time. Facing a threat of being delisted, Too Simple appealed and won. They now have until September 30th to file 4 delinquent reports, meaning they will stay on the exchange until at least that time. Earlier this year, Too Simple said it had about $1 billion in cash on hand, but without financial reports that cannot be confirmed, Too Simple blamed the issue on the resignation of its auditor. And finally, the percentage of women working as professional truck drivers has gone down since last year. That's one takeaway from the 2023 WIT Index released this week by the Women in Trucking Association. The index says women currently make up a little more than 12% of the truck driving workforce in the U.S. That's down 1.6 percentage points from last year, when the number clocked in at 13.7%. The report says a decrease could be due to a variety of factors, including a lack of quality childcare, an increased interest in homeschooling children, safety concerns for female drivers, misconceptions of career opportunities for female drivers, and an aging driver population that is now retiring. The annual WIT Index is meant to measure how many women are working in the trucking industry, whether it be behind the wheel, behind a C-suite desk, or in other roles. This year, it found that 31.6% of executives in the C-suite are women, while noting for the first time that women account for nearly 45% of all dispatchers. Just 7.5% of technicians are women. That's Landline Now News for today, and I'm Scott Thompson.
Thank you, Scott. Next, we find out about the newly launched Truck Leasing Task Force in our exclusive conversation with Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg, who says the latest moves out of the DOT are aimed at improving the lives of truckers. Also, Scott Thompson and Tyson Fisher of Landline Magazine take a trip into the parking zone, and Ashley Blackford speaks with Robert Rouse of DAT to get some tips on what owner-operators can do to get a leg up when it comes to the spot market. We'll be back with more in a moment. I'm Ryan Witkowski, and this is Landline Now.
You trust Prepass for more bypasses? Now let Prepass help with tolls. Prepass toll service means lower cost, one invoice for all tolls, and fewer violations. Created by truckers for truckers. Call 877-878-5970 or go to prepass.com.
Attention all truckers, Dean Michael, the tax doctor here. I want to talk to you about those dreaded tax problems. I know you want to keep on trucking and not even think about them, but let's face it, they're not going away all on their own. You need professional help. I've been helping truckers put their tax problems in the rearview mirror for years. I can help you too. Call me now for a free consultation at 888-557-4020 or go to mytaxhelpmd.com. It's like I always say, keep your eyes on the road, I'll keep mine on the IRS. 888-557-4020.
Welcome back to Landline Now. We've got a big guest coming up here in just a moment. We're about to talk to the Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg, about a newly formed task force that's dedicated to studying the lease purchase agreement model in the trucking industry. Mark Schirmer, first, though, of Landline Magazine, is going to join us here in Studio A. Mark, good to see you.
Yeah, glad to be here.
And again, we'll get to Secretary Buttigieg here in just a moment, but important, I think, to provide some context about this task force, which really has its work cut out for it, I think it's safe to say. This is a big problem in the industry.
Yeah, and so one of the things that we need to remind on this when we talk about these truck leasing, this specifically is looking at the category where a truck driver is oftentimes recruited by a company. The company owns the truck, and the driver is making payments back onto it, even though they're supposed to be an owner-operator. Rarely do these lease purchase programs work out for the driver at the end. Oftentimes we've heard of horror stories at the end of a pay period, the driver actually owing money to the company. This is the type of problem that they're trying to tackle right now.
Predatory. That's
100%.
That's the word that sticks out here like a sore thumb when we talk about these lease purchase agreements. So that lays the foundation here. Now we'll get to our conversation with Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg, who clearly has put a lot of thought into this issue. Secretary Buttigieg, Scott Thompson here. How you doing?
Very good. How are you doing?
Doing just great. Joined by Mark Schirmer of Landline Magazine.
Yeah, we just want to say thank you for joining us. We definitely appreciate your time.
Glad to be with you.
And I know your time is valuable, Mr. Secretary, so we'll jump right in here, starting with your opening remarks at the task force meeting where you mentioned some of the examples of predatory lease purchase agreements. I'm wondering here about the process and how DOT gathers information from drivers on truck leasing and all the other trucking policies that are out there. And are there any particular stories that you've heard from drivers specifically about truck leasing practices that have really resonated with you?
Well, we have formal, structured processes for getting this kind of information, but then also informal processes. That's where I've learned a ton just riding along with the drivers. I've done that in Illinois and New Jersey and Kentucky. Talk with drivers on the West Coast who work with the ports a lot to get more of a flavor for what they're dealing with, what they love about the job, and what the headaches are. And you hear a lot about parking. You hear a lot about detention time. And you hear a lot about leasing, and that's part of what pointed us toward making this one of the major lines of effort in our trucking action plan. So to the more formal side, this is why we created this Truck Leasing Task Force, because we knew it was an issue we're hearing about a lot. And we want to make sure we have an official way to get that information, get that data, get those stories on the record and into our policymaking process so that we can find the best ways to respond to protect people from predatory practices and to support a career and a profession that we need more than ever in this country.
Yeah, FMCSA Administrator Robin Hutchinson mentioned that the agency has data that shows that experienced truck drivers are the safest drivers out there on the road. How much of a focus is it for the Department of Transportation to put on eliminating the elements in the industry that lead to drivers, leaving the profession?
Well, it's a huge priority. Look, if you look at the number of drivers who leave their job every year, that alone is enough to cover the gap we have right now between the number of truck drivers who are operating and the number our country really needs. So, of course, we got to do recruiting. We got to encourage people and make it easier for people to take up this career. But that's just a leaky bucket if we're not making sure that this is a job that people want to stay in, both because that's how we're going to keep our numbers of drivers consistent with what America needs, and because, as you mentioned, we know that experienced drivers are the safest drivers. And so it's a safety win every time you keep a good, experienced driver on the road. But in order to get after that, that means we've got to tackle the issues that are affecting quality of life. That's why, in addition to this work on leasing, we are very focused on parking. We've funded new truck parking projects in Florida, in Tennessee, in Texas, in Louisiana. We're working with a lot of state DOTs that are using technology and new ways to help drivers know when and where parking spaces are available, because we know that's a quality of life issue and really a safety issue for so many drivers. And it's the kind of thing that if it goes on unaddressed has people reconsidering whether they want to be in this job. We also set up another advisory board that is focused on women in trucking. Make sure that we are hearing the voices of women in the industry and promoting better operations, better safety, things that are going to both recruit and retain them as well. So everything we can do to support truck drivers is, first of all, the right thing to do, and also an important investment in an economy that depends on drivers and that counts for economic and safety reasons on a way forward where fewer drivers throw up their hands and leave the profession altogether.
And I got to say, it's been refreshing, I think, at least from my perspective, to hear you talk about retention in the way that you do, because this is something that truck drivers and organizations have been kind of screaming from the rooftops for years or even decades now. And we're talking about compensation, among other things, when we're talking about retention. But in terms of just compensation, these unfair truck leasing schemes that take advantage of people, we see this happen kind of through the Fair Labor Standards Act motor carrier exemption. I'm wondering, does DOT support repealing that exemption? And I guess by extension, too, is DOT considering any policies to improve driver compensation, which in turn, as you pointed out there, would mitigate unsafe driving behaviors as well?
We want to make sure we're looking at this in a really systematic way. So we launched a compensation study last year. We're in the middle of that study now, so I don't want to get ahead of some of the findings. But this is a process that's supported by the bipartisan infrastructure law and allows us to look very specifically at the effect that compensation has on safety, on retention. And when you're looking at things like hourly pay, when you're looking at things like detention time, the fact that nobody but a trucker pays often for, especially when you got your owner-operators, no one's paying for wasting a truck driver's time, which of course is a direct economic issue as well as a quality of life issue. We've seen estimates that detention time costs drivers over $1 billion a year, and also leads to the industry as a whole losing somewhere between $3 and $6.5 billion worth of driving time every year. So we need to get after these issues and also make sure that we don't have unintended consequences from the fact that what counts as an hour of work from the perspective of the ELD for fatigue and safety reasons is not the same as what actually amounts to an hour of work if you're on the job but not actively driving. So these are the kinds of things that we're digging into in this study, and I think the results are going to force some serious conversations about policy changes. Again, I don't want to get ahead of the study because we really need to gather that data, but over the coming months as that study continues, I think it's going to lead to some really important conversations that have been a long time coming and lead to some new policies, maybe even some new legislation too.
Going back to specifically the Truck Leasing Task Force, at the end of your opening remarks, you made a commitment to making progress in regards to predatory, lease purchase agreements. I know it's extremely early in the process, but what are some of the possible avenues the DOT could take to address this problem?
Well, this is exactly what we want to make sure we hear from the industry, from drivers, from labor organizations and consumer protection groups, everyone who has a stake in this, because we really want that to be informed by what the people who are living this have to say. But we know that there have to be ways to make leasing agreements more transparent so that you understand what you're dealing with before you sign on the dotted line. Now, we got to make sure that there are the right kinds of rules and parameters and guardrails around what those leasing agreements can contain. When you see some of these practices, you see people getting presented with higher mileage trucks than they might have expected, or not getting a chance to test drive, or getting service contracts that have a lot of fine print that wind up really creating a gap between what a driver thinks they are going to make and what they're actually going to make when you take into account the costs, the repair bills, and insurance or anything else that falls on the driver. These are the kinds of things that we think we can go after. But as you said, it's early, and this isn't going to be based on things we come up with sitting there in headquarters. This is going to be based on what the motor carriers and the owner operators and the groups and labor organizations and policymakers and everybody else who has some expertise on this that's on that task force can help us to gather up in terms of information and to see better.
Secretary Buttigieg, we've only got about a minute left here because I know your time is valuable. Wanted to ask you one last question here. You know, we've talked about the Truck Leasing Task Force. You mentioned the Women of Trucking Advisory Board, driver compensation, a lot of big issues that DOT has at least started to tackle during your time there as secretary. I'm wondering, with all of these big issues out there and all of these problems, if there were one of these issues that you could resolve by the end of your tenure as secretary, one you believe that would make the greatest impact, and one that DOT you think can, in fact, tackle, what would that thing be?
Well, each of the elements we talked about is important. I guess if there's one measure I'm trying to look at that will tell us how we're doing, that's where I look at the retention numbers. So, of course, we're still focused on recruitment too, but retention tells you what the people who are living the reality of being a truck driver in America today actually think about the sustainability and the viability and the quality of their job. If they're being compensated well and have good quality of life and feel safe, then you're going to see those retention numbers improve. And so there's a lot of ingredients that go into that. But if we see the needle move on that, we know we're doing the right thing. If we don't, then we know we've got more work cut out for us.
Secretary Buttigieg, we'll leave it there, but thank you very much for your time today. You've got an open invite anytime you want to come on. We appreciate it.
We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And I just want to emphasize my appreciation to the community people who get things where they need to be in this country. I think we've come a long way in the last couple of years in the public's recognition of the essential nature of this work, but there's more work to be done, and appreciate you giving voice to that industry.
Back here now in Studio A with Mark Schremer. Our thanks once again to Secretary Buttigieg for his time. Mark, good conversation.
100%. And it's really nice to, hear the comments that they're taking this issue seriously. And it really sounds like he's genuine, that they want to solve this problem and make real progress.
Yeah, and as I said to him, it is refreshing to hear the Secretary talk about some of these issues that, as I said, people have been yelling about from rooftops for years and years and maybe even decades here. The key word maybe was retention. He talked about retention a lot during this interview. The question, or I guess questions become, how much can DOT realistically do with some of these issues? And on the other hand, we're seeing a bunch of policies being put forth, things like speed limiters, AEB systems, autonomous trucks, that are being put forward that, are not going to be met with enthusiasm from the industry.
Yeah, speed limiters had more than 15,000 comments, and if you go through them, you can find a lot of them from drivers that say, if this goes through, I'm leaving the industry. I've been around 20 years, 30 years, safe miles, no crashes, and I'm going to leave the industry. So we definitely have to look at it from these things, and like you said, it is so refreshing. We're so happy to hear they're looking at broker issues, looking at these predatory lease purchase agreements, trying to get truck parking, restroom access, all of these great things that are happening to help the driver experience and make it easier to be a truck driver out there. But we also do need to look at overregulation because, Secretary Buttigieg and Administrator Hutchinson both said, the data shows that experienced truck drivers are the safest drivers out there. And so they need to, keep them and retain them.
Absolutely. Again, thanks to Secretary Buttigieg for joining the show. Mark, thanks to you as well for joining us. If you'd like to hear our talk again, you can head to landline.media, which is also where you can find Mark's story on the Truck Leasing Task Force and this conversation with the Secretary. We've got a break coming up, but Landline Now is back in just a moment.
Firestone tires are for more of everything. More miles for every tire dollar, and more confidence in your fleet. At Firestone, we help fleets save with dependable value. Find your local Firestone dealer today at firestonetire.com/dealer.
Ready to make more money? Use a better load board. For a limited time, get 50% off Truckstop Load Board Pro. Just go to truckstop.com/go and enter promo code READY2023 when you purchase Load Board Pro.
A blank space on many maps with the distance between parking spaces seemingly as great as infinity. It is the boundary that separates safety and security from the dangers of the road, the space between electronic signs and a place in which to rest. It is not a dimension of the imagination, but instead the reality faced by truck drivers every single day. It is a place we call the parking zone. Here are your guides for this journey into parking news good and bad, Scott Thompson and Tyson Fisher.
Thanks, Mark, as we welcome in the aforementioned Tyson Fisher into Studio A for a rundown of all things parking. Tyson, how you doing?
Pretty good. It's a pleasure being here.
Always good to have you. Always good to see you. You always come with a lot of solid information about all the latest with truck parking, the good, the bad, the ugly. There's a little bit of everything usually. We're going to start with a few positive things, some of the good here, I think, on truck parking. The first two of which come from the federal level. We've got new details on the federal RAISE grant program and the amount of money going from it specifically toward truck parking, right?
Yes, correct. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, he announced $2.2 billion in the Rebuilding American Infrastructure with Sustainability and Equity grants, also known as the RAISE grants. Grants were awarded to 162 projects across the nation, including 2 truck parking facilities. One was a $9 million facility in Caldwell County, Texas. The project will fund the design and construction of a commercial truck parking plaza in the northwest quadrant of State Highway 130 and the San Marcos Highway, State Highway 80 intersection. So the plaza will include about 20 short-term parking spaces, but the good news is they'll have 100 long-term truck parking spaces.
Yeah.
So there'll be more to it than just that. The project also will have entry-exit gate control, has some lighting, fencing, 24-hour monitored security, and it says they'll have a rest stop with restrooms, showers, and other amenities. So
sounds nice.
Yeah, full-on facility, not just parking. So a little bit of everything over there.
Yeah, and again, that's Caldwell County, Texas, right? But one of just a few projects that are getting started here.
Another one is a $10.5 million project in Caldwell Parish, Louisiana. This project will fund the land acquisition and construction for the truck parking facility located near the inland port of Columbia and State Highway 165. This will include parking for about 50 commercial trucks, 100 cars, as well as 12 electric vehicle charging stations. So those are the 2 parking projects that are going on with the RAISE, the most recent RAISE grant.
Right.
But it's kind of a big deal in the sense that this shows that the federal government is willing to give, millions of dollars to truck parking facilities, even when competing with other infrastructure projects. I know we have talked about in the past how it's hard for truck parking projects to get funding because you're competing with a whole bunch of other infrastructure projects. Well, in this case, at least with the RAISE grants, 162 projects awarded, 2 of which were truck parking. So, not
it's
bad.
Something.
Yeah, it's something.
Yeah, and I don't think the main takeaway here is that you need Caldwell in the title of your city or county to get the grant, because we've got Caldwell County, Texas, and Caldwell Parish, Louisiana. Coincidence there, but maybe if you want more truck parking projects, maybe change the name of your locality to Caldwell. I don't know. So we're talking federal level. We've got a positive development there. We've talked before many times and continue to talk about how this is going to, take an effort on many fronts. We've talked about the Truck Parking Safety Improvement Act. $755 million is the idea over a 3-year period dedicated specifically for truck parking. Haven't heard a whole lot recently in terms of updates on this.
Sure.
What can you tell us about what's going on now?
Not a whole lot since we last spoke. We got a few more co-sponsors. In total, there are 28 co-sponsors. The latest co-sponsor being Brad Finstad, a Republican in Minnesota. As you mentioned, this is $755 million over 3 years for the construction of parking spots. And according to the bill text, this is any project funded by the bill cannot include paid parking. I think that's very important. All parking under the bill must be publicly accessible and free of charge. 28 co-sponsors, not bad. I think we can do better.
Yeah, for sure.
There's quite a few, representatives out there. But the good news is that anyone, and I do mean anyone, can go to fightingfortruckers.com. Just go to that website, scroll down, and click the link that says "Tell your lawmakers to support the Truck Parking Safety Improvement Act."
Yep.
And then from there, you'll just find like this really easy to fill out form, and that form, when you submit it, will go directly to your federal lawmakers. You don't even need to know the name of your federal lawmakers. Technically, you don't need it.
You might learn it, I guess.
You'll learn
through
it.
that process.
That's right.
Yeah. And just real quick to add on to that, too, I was in D.C. a couple months ago and met with a few lawmakers on trucking-related issues. And it's clear when you talk to them that they are tuned in as much as they can be, but there are so many bills floating out there, not just trucking-related bills, obviously, but bills all over the place, that it can be difficult for them to keep up with every issue. So that phone call, that email, however you choose to reach out, really does go a long way to making them aware of the problem and then hopefully doing something about it. So we keep looking for some positive resolution on this. Hopefully this year we will get something on that Truck Parking Safety Improvement Act. Let's move here on a smaller scale and kind of run through some of the issues maybe on the state level to begin with. We do have a new truck stop in Nevada that's bringing more than 100 spaces to the southern part of the state.
Yeah, just really briefly, this is called the El Dorado Truck Stop and Travel Center. It'll be open soon. It's expected to open in August of this year. But yes, you pointed out, we're talking about 100 new truck parking spaces for the $25 million project. Plans for the new development features a 12,000 square foot travel center, and that will include showers, food and beverage options, fuel stations, and truck washing facilities. So, just another, like I said, 100 truck parking spaces in Nevada. That's exactly what we're looking for.
Absolutely. I mentioned off the top that we cover the good, the bad, the ugly with regard to truck parking. We'll get into some of the bad and perhaps ugly here a little bit. Not so great updates coming out of a few states. Maryland is the one we'll start with here, where NIMBYism looks like it may prevent a truck stop from getting built there.
Yeah, so a developer wants to build a truck stop on Spielman Road, which is near Williamsport, Maryland. But some residents are basically saying, yeah, not so fast. So according to the Herald Mail, the Washington County Board of Zoning Appeals, they approved a special exception to allow the truck stop. So that's the good news. The bad news is that the residents opposing the truck stop say that they were pretty much left out of the decision-making process. And so they filed an appeal in the Washington County Circuit Court. So right now that is pending. We don't know how that's going to go so far, but they just feel that their voices weren't heard from the beginning. And so in order for them to get their voices heard, they're taking it to the courts.
Yeah. And, I see kind of both sides of this issue, this one, because you would hope that residents are given a say or at least allowed, their voice is allowed to be heard when you're talking about something like this. But again, a misconception there, I think, about truck stops, and we've all talked about this before, but you would hope to see this thing move forward there, obviously. Similar situation, I suppose, there in Long Island in New York as well, right?
Yeah, Long Island, and I'm pretty sure pronouncing this right, is Syosset, New York, which is, as you mentioned, basically Long Island.
Yep. Easier to say.
Much easier, yes. But residents there are opposing a proposed truck parking facility, claiming that the project will bring in too much traffic and noise. As proposed, the truck parking facility will have spots for 42 bobtails and 112 semi-trailers, as well as 80 passenger vehicles. As of this conversation, the planning board has not voted on the issue, so we will see how that goes. But, I mean, that's a lot of truck parking spaces for any truck stop. 112 semi-trailers and 42 bobtails, so we're talking about 150.
Yeah, that's a good-sized stop there. And that's something that kind of strikes me when I look at this list that you have here as a whole. We talk about the ones, the truck stops that are sort of, opposed by people in the community. But then for every one of those, it seems like we've got 2 or 3 other truck stops that are going up in communities across the nation. Mm-hmm. Private industry really is picking up the slack for a lot of these needs that are out there.
Absolutely.
And Love's, just looking at your list here, Love's has been very busy of late,
Yes.
right? They've got a few, more than a few, I guess, opening up.
Yeah, they're always busy. They're always proposing a new location somewhere. So yeah, Love's is closer to getting a new location just east of Buffalo, Wyoming, is where they're looking at right now. The Buffalo City Council approved of an infrastructure agreement between Love's and the city. So Buffalo, by the way, is located near the Interstate 90, Interstate 25 interchange. And so if you're kind of wondering if is this a truck stop that I could use, well, if that's where you go, then there you go.
Yes, you can. Yeah.
I couldn't figure out exactly how many truck parking spaces are being proposed for the new location, but Love's is usually pretty good at having quite a few truck parking spaces in their locations. So,
Absolutely.
So yeah, that's Buffalo, Wyoming over there.
Yeah, and then you've got, Texas, Georgia, and not just Love's either. TA Express, we've got Pilot. The list goes on with private enterprises, again, opening up new locations throughout the United States. I don't know if you want to talk about those specifically. I know you do have another talking point in terms of NIMBYism and maybe your least favorite topic. I'm not sure. Maybe I'm putting words in your mouth. But Joliet, Illinois is back in the headlines as well. I'll let you kind of run with what you want to talk about of those options there, I suppose.
Well, you teased me with the Joliet,
yeah,
so
there you go.
We'll go ahead and go there. Yeah, it's been mentioned many times in the truck parking zone. What we have mentioned in the past is that there's been lots of proposals for truck stops in Joliet, and pretty much every single time those proposals have been shot down, mostly because of the NIMBYs in that area. The most recent thing to happen over there is that the city council has voted unanimously to establish a new ordinance that requires private property have a permit that allows for tractor trailer parking. Now, the reason why this is kind of a big deal is because there's no truck stops there, or not enough truck stops, I should say. Truckers had to get creative in terms of where they're going to park. And so they would find abandoned parking lots, for example, and say, well, here, I'll just park here. And technically they could. Well, not anymore. Now, in order for a truck to park anywhere on private property, that private property has to have a permit for them to park there. So if it doesn't already have a permit, then you cannot park there.
So this is something that makes it easier for truckers to find a place, or it sounds like maybe harder.
It'll be more difficult.
Yeah, right?
It'll be more difficult for them to find a parking spot.
Yeah.
Other than going to just some random, abandoned lot, you say you would think it'd be safe to park there. You have to now know whether or not there's a permit for you to park there. Which is, it does boggle the mind a little bit. But.
Well, I just keep picturing empty store shelves at some point when people say, you know what? I'm not going to come there anymore because I have nowhere to park.
What are you going to do?
Maybe that's where we're headed, and maybe that's a lesson that needs to be learned there in Joliet. I don't know. Maybe I'm editorializing too much, but the saga of Joliet, Illinois continues with regard to truck parking. Tyson, I said it before, but again, just looking at this list, you are on top of the truck parking issue. It is very clear. We always appreciate you coming by, shedding light on all these stories, and again, the good, bad, and ugly. And we learn something every time. We appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me.
You can check out Tyson's work on landline.media and in every issue of Landline magazine. As for Landline Now, we're back in just a moment.
Forget misaccuracy, weigh your truck on a cat scale.
When you weigh on a cat scale, you get a no excuses guarantee. You can now save time weighing by using your smartphone. Find out more at weightmytruck.com.
Since you started, what you've loved about trucking is the freedom. Heading out on your favorite route, a good driving song, and thinking about truck insurance. Well, maybe not that last one. That's why we're here. At OOIDA, we have a full range of truck insurance products, expert advice, and great customer service, helping you get the right coverage for your operation. Go to OOIDA.com, because your job is to drive. Our job is to help with everything else.
It's tested and proven. Burn 2.1% less fuel when you balance all wheel ends with Centromatic. Call 800-523-8473 to get the OOIDA discount.
Landline Now. Welcome back. There are a number of critical questions you need to answer in order to run a successful trucking business. Among the most important of those questions are, where's the freight going to be, and how much is it going to pay? Today, Landline Now senior correspondent Ashley Blackford will bring us answers to both of those important questions with a look at this week's freight markets with the folks from DAT. Here's Ashley now with the report.
Thanks, Mark, and hello once again to Robert Rouse of DAT. How are you doing today, Robert?
I'm doing great. Thanks for asking, Ashley.
Now, last week, as the country celebrated Independence Day, how did that impact the freight market?
Yeah, the 4th of July holiday has traditionally been a time when we see carriers take some extended time off to be at home with their families and celebrate our great country. Based on the number of trucks on the Members Edge load board last week, that's definitely what we saw with a large number of drivers taking some time off. There were almost 20% fewer trucks than the previous week last week. That being said, we still saw almost 291,000 trucks, which is still a fairly strong market. Does relate back to the 2019-2018 timeframe. When we look at the number of loads posted on the Members Edge load board last week, we saw loads posted drop by 37% from the previous week. For comparison, we saw a similar number of postings back in 2019. There's a lot of similarities between 2019 and this year. That is that the last time the 4th of July holiday was in the middle of a work week, as well as a similarly oversupplied market. So with everything trying to move last week, the week prior to the 4th of July holiday, it's not out of the world that this would actually come down a little bit last week.
As we start the second half of the year, what trends should owner-operators be looking at?
Yeah, one of the trends that I found really fascinating is the impact of population migration to the south or the southeast over the past few years. Truckload carriers have been experiencing considerable growth in freight volumes in the southeast and southwest since the pandemic began in early 2020. It's likely to be sustained based on the recent data from the U.S. Census Bureau. The Northeast, which is traditionally a GDP powerhouse for our country, now contributes less to the national GDP than the 6 fastest growing states in the South. So those are Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, and Texas. The population migration during the pandemic helped steer about $100 billion in new income to the Southeast in 2020 and 2021 alone, while the Northeast lost about $60 billion. And based on analysis for recently published Internal Revenue Service data, the Southeast has accounted for more than 2/3 of all job growth in the U.S. since early 2020, almost doubling its pre-pandemic share. The Census Bureau said in May that 9 of the nation's 15 fastest growing cities were actually in the South, with 6 of them being in Texas alone. Topping the list was actually Fort Worth, followed by Phoenix, 2 markets that have experienced massive freight growth in the past 3 years. The volume of dry van loads moved by truckload carriers in the DAT freight network into Fort Worth market since the start of 2019 has actually increased by 81%, while outbound loads to all destinations have increased by 67%. Inbound outbound load volumes to all origins and to all destinations in Phoenix have actually increased by 60% over the same time frame. The Census Bureau actually estimates 2.2 million people have moved to the Southeast or Southwest in the last 2 years. And that population shift is going to be both permanent and impactful from a freight perspective. As those people have moved, that's definitely going to draw a lot of the need for more resources in those areas. And if we look at some of the markets last week, 3 of the top 5 freight markets in the entire country were located in the South, those being Atlanta, Dallas, and Houston. So just one example for vans in Atlanta, there was 117 unique lanes out of that specific market, and the average rate per mile last week was at $2.29 per mile. So that's a great market to look at. And so Southeast and Southwest are definitely going to be some areas for carriers to look at for the significant future.
So far in 2023, the spot market has been up and down from week to week. What advice do you have for owner-operators to set themselves apart from the rest?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is going back to the basics, and communication is a really crucial piece. Whether it's an up or down market, it's really important and crucial to have strong communications between all parties involved. Earlier this year, I spoke with several brokers to understand kind of what they expect from owner-operators in this type of economy. The biggest takeaways from those conversations was that a key way to earn their trust was to always be communicating a plan. Brokers or shippers don't want to have to truly manage the movement of freight. So when a carrier tells them exactly how they are going to accomplish the job, it really sets them apart. That even goes when things go wrong. Breakdowns happen, everybody understands that, but proactively reaching out to the broker or shipper and letting them know how you plan to get their freight delivered will go a long way to building a really strong relationship. One example that I spoke with a broker from Echo basically said, hey, I am going to trust a carrier that much more and even pay more for a carrier if I know specifically, they call me and say, hey, my tire blew out. Here's when I plan to get it fixed. Here's the impact to the freight volume or the freight getting to the location, and making sure that that's communicated. That puts the broker and the shipper in a trusting situation. When a broker knows that there's a strong communication from the carrier, they're more likely to call that carrier when they need something super important. This can often lead to higher rates because they know they will not need to spend as much time managing those shipments, and that you are actually going to take care of their customer, which is the shipper. Last thing, just want to mention some of our ongoing efforts to fight fraud. We talked a little bit about that last week as well, about adding multi-factor authentication and things like that. For more information about what we're doing for fraud, you can always visit dat.com/fraud protection and get all the latest information there.
Now, diesel is up 3 cents according to EIA. How do you anticipate that impacting drivers?
Yeah, it's really interesting. We're seeing diesel kind of go up and down over the last couple of weeks. I think that we have, even though it has come down, this is still impacting carriers' bottom lines. So it's something that carriers should definitely take a look at, how they can find different ways to reduce their cost with diesel. So one of the ways that carriers can do that is look at different fuel card partners within the DAT1 mobile application. Carriers can even find what's the cheapest price for all the different locations around. Those types of little things can help. One of the things that we know that for owner operators, when you're looking at how you can reduce your cost, it's really those variable costs that have a huge impact that you can really kind of tweak to help improve your business and help stay a little more profitable.
If our listeners want more information, where can they go for that?
Yeah, you can get the latest rate information at dat.com/trendlines or look for the weekly market updates on the DAT blog. They're published every Wednesday. Check out and subscribe to the DAT IQ channel on YouTube, where our analytics and forecasting teams take a deeper dive into the freight markets each week. There's a new episode every Tuesday. It's a great way to take a deeper dive into what trends we discuss here.
All right, wonderful. Robert, thank you so much.
Thanks, Ashley. Appreciate it.
That was Robert Rouse with DAT. Mark, back to you.
Thanks, Ashley. A quick reminder that OOIDA has 2 calls to action out right now. The first is on a proposed rule to require automatic emergency braking in all trucks. The second is calling on truckers to support H.R. 3039, a bill in the U.S. House that would stop FMCSA from mandating speed limiters on trucks. You can express your opinion very easily on both by using the website fightingfortruckers.com. I'm Mark Redick, and this is Landline Now.
I'm a dad,
a son,
a husband,
wife,
I'm a writer,
photographer.
I farm.
I'm a veteran.
I love old cars, fishing,
my kids,
chrome, and I am
a
professional truck driver.
And together we are OOIDA.
OOIDA was founded by truckers to stand up and speak on behalf of truckers. We've done that by combining the individual voices of our members into a single, powerful voice. Protecting your interests, defending your rights.
Join us! Make your voice heard. Join OOIDA, the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. Call 1-800-444-5791 or visit ooida.com.